Hangout in the Holy Land, Land Grant Holy Land's video podcast, episode 11. We actually shoot and tape this thing live, but, very seldomly do we have an excuse to actually put it up live on the site as we do it. We're going to roll the dice here. We don't know how this is totally going to work. We might have random people stop by and show us their unmentionables and tell us to put our privates in places that we physically can't, but we're going to take that risk because National Signing Day 2013, Urban Meyer absolutely killed it. Jim Tressel had his fair share of what we consider rather stout signing classes, so I don't want to take anything away from the vest, but Meyer just does it at a different level, kind of in a much different way. Ted and I were talking offline before we get started, which, by the way, I'm joined by Ted Glover. In terms of what we were accustomed to with Jim Tressel, we were just talking about this before we got the show started. Jim Tressel would stick to the guys that he was familiar with through his sources in Ohio, and would get high caliber, 4- and 5-star kids. But something we were just talking about, like some of these guys that we're seeing him close with, Dontre Wilson, Von Bell, these aren't guys necessarily that unless he got early, he would have necessarily gotten, especially not on the final day the way Urban Meyer did. The final 72 hours, I should say, like Urban Meyer did today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's kind of become a custom for us as Ohio State fans the last 6, 7, 8 years, whatever the case may be, that going into National Signing Day, there would be 2 or 3 guys on the board that were, looked like we had a very good chance of getting and would sign and send their letter of intent into Ohio State, and it never seemed to work out. I was trying to think earlier just off the top of my head, and I can't think of one guy in the last 4 or 5 years that we were quote unquote in on signing day that actually signed with Ohio State. So my expectations were kind of, well, if we get one guy, that's great. And then we ended up getting Von Bell, which, we kind of news broke earlier in the day that he was probably going to go to Tennessee. And like, well, okay, we still had a pretty good day. And then Bell signed, and then, Elliott stayed on board. And it just turned out to be an absolutely fantastic day and an epic close to what I think is going to be, when we look back on this, one of Ohio State's all-time great classes.
And I think the really scary thing, like I mentioned in our piece, kind of summing up the class, is that the best is yet to come. I mean, not only will these guys just grow on the football field and off, but I think the 2014 class may even surpass them in terms of sheer talent. So that's mind-boggling. We won't get ahead of ourselves with that just quite yet. But in terms of the guys that we've brought in, we know the 5 early enrollees: Eli Apple, Cam Burrows, J.T. Barrett, Tracy Sprinkle, guys we've all featured on the site already. We'll cover Tyquan Lewis very shortly, and Tyquan is certainly a guy I think has been slept on a little bit. But in terms of the 19 guys that sent in their national letters of intent today, definitely some exciting talent. Von Bell, you just talked about, was a name that really caught me off guard. Our recruiting editor and director of scouting, Ian Cuevas, predicted that Von Bell would sign with Ohio State based on a gut feeling. I wasn't seeing it. Bell was actually probably my favorite player that Ohio State targeted in this entire cycle. I think that the guy is just a pure beast. He reminds me actually a lot of Eric Berry, which, having Tennessee go after him scared me, because they certainly, although it's 2 coaching staffs ago that probably recruited Berry, being able to pitch him, that whole pedigree and show tapes of Berry to Bell and try and sell him on that, a team that he grew up rooting for. Berry was actually probably a guy that he watched. This makes him sound incredibly young, but probably when he was like middle school and whatnot, he watched Berry play college football. So that being said, though, Urban Meyer, and more specifically Everett Withers, who I think Von Bell's originally high school coach, came out this evening and said that Withers was just the most professional, cordial coach he's ever dealt with in the recruiting process. And Withers himself mentioned at his press conference this afternoon that he had been in the Rossville, Georgia area, or, on the Tennessee-Georgia border so much recruiting Bell that he not only had gotten a haircut there, but he also knew a good barbecue place that he was well accustomed to eating at.
Yeah.
So yeah, barber and a barbecue shop. You've laid some groundwork there if you've been there that often, but it's certainly worked out. Withers, I think, is I saw a bunch of people saying, I guess, in the lead up to signing day, that Withers may not be with Ohio State for more than maybe this season. And I couldn't possibly wrap my head around it. He wasn't outstanding at North Carolina, that we did the best with a bad circumstance, not unlike Luke Fickell, but the way he closed, like if he's able to do that at anywhere near the same clip or hire guys that can, I mean, maybe he does deserve one of those, MAC or second-tier BCS conference coaching jobs here in a little bit. But we'll get ahead of ourselves. The co-defensive coordinator did a brilliant job getting Bell. I think he's the best player in the class, and I can't wait to watch him play. I think that he may not play from day one, but I think that he could be a starter by his second year on campus, which is insane. In terms of the other big day or big name on today's National Signing Day docket that signed, James Clark, a guy that
Huge signing.
Yeah, New Smyrna Beach, or Smyrna. I don't know. I've never been there, but another Florida speedster from the Speed State, to go with the horrible cliche from the NCAA football series. The guy can fly. You've seen his tape. I mean, he's not the
Yeah.
kind of burner that we ever would have seen wearing scarlet and gray if they weren't named Ted Ginn, previously. But Ohio State has like two or three of those guys in this class. I mean, we've got Clark, we've got Wilson, we've got Corey Smith that can absolutely just blaze, and just getting guys like that is unbelievably exciting. So I think that just in terms of those two guys, I wasn't banking on Clark. I thought Clark might be heading to Florida, especially after Ryan Timmons elected to stay home at Kentucky yesterday. So adding Clark is just icing on the cake. And then just the matter of fact that they were able to keep Ezekiel Elliott, I think, goes a long way. I watched Ezekiel Elliott at the opening 2012 in Eugene last year, and what he showcased in the games they featured, it's 7-on-7 football, so it's a little bit arcadey, a little bit, not exactly what he'll see, but it's not too far of a proximity from the offense that Tom Herman and Urban Meyer like to run in terms of its openness. And the guy was great catching the ball out of the backfield. It is kind of more of not flag football, but it is kind of more of like a sling it around, pass happy mini game that they have in 7-on-7 football. But Elliott looks so comfortable catching the ball. I thought he actually looked a better receiver at the time than Jalen Marshall did. So I'm beyond thrilled they were able to keep him. And it's awesome to hear that Urban Meyer, say things to the effect of, we had him in the bank all along. Like, we were never in doubt. I guess Urban talked to his father, Stacy, which if Stacy Elliott is watching this, I got to apologize. I was so tired at the end of National Signing Day. I saw a tweet from our friends at the Buckeye Battle Cry acknowledge Stacy's mother or Ezekiel's mother and her husband Stacy on Twitter, and I misread Stacy's handle as being the same as Eli Apple's mom. So I was like, yeah, two awesome ladies. I think that following recruits is a weird thing, and following recruits' family is even weirder. But Eli's mom and Mrs. Elliott are actually both two very open, like transparent, interesting people. Talking about their kids' process, I think, has always been fascinating to keep an eye on. But Stacey Elliott, you made great videos showcasing Kerry Coombs, giving the full Ohio State pitch. So certainly thank you for that, and I am quite aware that you're a gentleman. So apologies on the misconstruing. Any other names that jump out at you from this class, though, from what you've had a chance to review?
You touched on it real quick. I mean, I think everybody got so focused on who we got today that we sort of got lost in the shuffle. A guy like Jalen Marshall, you mentioned his name. Years back, that was going to be the key guy we would get, and we would all be happy with it. And Jalen Marshall is still, I hate to make it sound like he's like some sort of second string or second tier or whatever. He's probably one of the best. He is one of the best receiver recruits in the country, and he's going to be able to contribute immediately, just like Clark and just like Wilson and just like Corey Smith. And that JUCO Smith, the JUCO transfer, I think is going to be a great success story. Had some academic issues, got those solved, and when you look at the possible talent that could be on the field at one time, and the guys we've talked about, and the guys coming back, and Devin Smith and Carlos Hyde, I mean, it's just going to be a level of I think we were talking about earlier, 4 Ted Ginns on the field at one time, and you look back at the years of Teddy Ginn and Anthony Gonzalez and those guys and what they were able to do with a quarterback like Troy Smith, and it makes me think that we're going to have that kind of offense again real soon. That 2006 offense was just amazing to watch, and they could pass the ball. They could have a really strong power running game with Beanie Wells when he was a freshman. They had Antonio Pittman, who was kind of the speed scat back out of the backfield, and you're seeing a lot of that, but only applied in a different way. Urban Meyer style. That's going to be absolutely no mercy on anybody. It's going to be interesting to watch, to say the least.
Yeah, the crazy thing is you just mentioned Pittman as a change of pace back, which he's so relatively speaking. I mean, the guy had fringe NFL talent, but he was not that at all. He was a traditional running back, and now we actually have 3-4 guys that are legit scat backs that they do have the versatility. We've got some guys that are going to probably play at safety that played offense in high school. Chris Worley, even actually Eli Apple played some wide receiver. So in addition to Worley, I was thinking of Darren Lee, the New Albany product from the Columbus area. So those guys are probably going to be safeties, and Worley can just absolutely lick people. I think that Lee will be able to maybe be pretty fierce free safety and everything's said and done, if not maybe a corner. But I think free safety is probably his best position. We haven't even gotten to Ohio State's defensive line pickups. I mean,
I was gonna
last year.
Oh, by the way, what about the defense? Last year we talked about the defensive line, and they got another huge haul with guys like Joey Bosa and Billy Price this year. I mean, it's just another incredible defensive line haul.
Yeah, I mean, Urban Meyer is rebuilding this team in the same image he did his Florida teams that won the national championships. And really what made the 2006 and 2008 Florida teams so elite is that they had depth at defensive line. And not just depth, they had, they went 5-6 deep with NFL caliber guys, and that's what Ohio State is building towards. Last year we saw Noah Spence, Adolphus Washington, Tommy Shutt. These guys just came in and provided, especially in Washington's case, we saw in the Michigan game him providing an immediate impact. Spence definitely had his fair share of plays as well. And now this year they're just, stacking the deck and adding even more. If the worst of the bunch, and I use worst incredibly liberally, 3-star defensive lineman, flexible DTD, E. Tracy Sprinkle, that's the rich getting richer. Tyquan Lewis is a 4-star guy, and no one's talking about him because Bosa is so good, and because they bring in the caliber of a Michael Hill to play defensive tackle. They've got Billy Price. The one interesting thing is that I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's a coach who sometimes contributes his insights on the Ozone. He's kind of like an old school Ohio talent evaluator, and actually pointed out something that I've heard a couple people say that have backgrounds in coaching, is that maybe Price projects better on the O-line. That was maybe the one knock on this class. They did add Evan Lyle, but they weren't super deep. That second tackle kind of slipped through their hands, and some of it was through no fault of their own. Some of it does fall on the coaches, but we could see Price ultimately converted to like a center or a guard if the O-line gets done enough. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. Another name we haven't even mentioned, Donovan Munker, is also a guy that can play both offense and defensive line. And then Tim Gardner, a super sleeper, a kid from Indianapolis that had a weird kind of arc in getting to Ohio State. He actually changed his Facebook profile status, whatever you want to call it, and said Ohio State football commit, and no one even thought that Ohio State had offered him. And I guess they hadn't. I think he was getting ahead of himself, or maybe he'd had a positive talk and assumed that they were going to offer him, and they hadn't. Nonetheless, a couple weeks later, less than a month, I think, he actually did formally get the offer. It was committable. He committed on the spot and has been a loyal Buckeye ever since. Got his faction this afternoon. He's in the fold. I mean, it's as Ohio State fans, we're so unbelievably spoiled to have 3-star guys and have that be like the weak part of the class.
The weak part of that, that's.
And I use weak again.
I know exactly what you're saying, and we look at those guys and again, like you, I don't want to say anything negatively about the previous regime because it was so successful. But we look at those guys and say, well, we add a guy like Jalen Marshall, and then you get a kid like Tim Gardner, and kind of maybe a project in past years. You're like, well, okay, it's pretty good, but now you're looking at the quality of recruits that Urban Meyer is bringing from both sides of the ball. Last year was really big on the defensive line. This year I would have to. I think everybody would agree that the wide receivers or the skill position guys was just it takes your breath away when you look at the talent that's coming in, and that's now kind of the norm. And in past years you would be, well, we're going to have this great class, and then we'll drop down, and we'll still be good, and we'll still contend for the Big Ten title, but that the whole paradigm in terms of recruiting at Ohio State has changed, and I think we saw that start last year with the late surge after Meyer got hired and hit the ground running, and we're really seeing the effect this year. And I think it's kind of goofy to maybe already put aside this great class, but 2014 is already rounding up to possibly be an even better class, and that's something that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around right now. But we've got some great leads on kids. We've got the Detroit Cass cornerback that has already committed to Ohio State for next year, which the coaching staff in Columbus likes to talk about planting the recruiting flag, and now they've done it in the heart of Michigan's pipeline. So I mean, it's just exciting times on the recruiting front for Ohio State. No
doubt, and I think that you just mentioned Damon Webb, the 4-star cornerback, maybe a 5 when everything's said and done.
Yeah,
we talk about the cornerbacks, the defensive backs in this class. Gary and Connolly is a guy that a lot of people think is going to be a superstar. Eli Apple and Cam Burrows are early enrollees. They're going to be playing in the spring game, and they're going to be impact guys from day one, getting in and adding depth at the defensive back position. But what I think that we look forward to Webb. Some people are saying Webb's better than these guys, and he's only a junior in high school. So that's insane to think about. if we're lucky, Bosa will fit that mold and maybe even outclass Noah Spence and Adolphus Washington. I'm not going to bank on it certainly, and I think we sound like super homers even like talking like this, but hey, we're excited, and can you really blame us? I mean, this class is something special. Was there any disappointments in your mind? I know I mentioned the lack of a second tackle, and that's nitpicky, right? Was there anything in your mind that stood out, or?
It's really tough to complain. I really can't. You could make the case that maybe an Ohio State could have gotten another offensive lineman, but I'm not going to complain at all. This is a fantastic class up and down the line. And it's not because of the level of talent that Ohio State amassed. That's certainly part of it, but they really addressed serious positions of need. There was a lot of inconsistency in the skill positions last year, and I think a lot of that is going to get solved. There's going to be a lot of competition for playing time come spring ball, and it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. I don't think anybody, even guys like Devin Smith and Philly Brown, I don't know that anybody's guaranteed a job now that all these guys are coming in and are going to be competing and pushing for playing time.
Yeah, I think that, I don't want to say that we're going to have people passing Devin Smith and the like just quite yet, but we think back to January of last year, and Urban Meyer, and part of it was a motivational tactic undoubtedly, but he just kept saying how they weren't set at all at the wide receiver position, how it was kind of a real liability and something that's just really kind of maybe put them behind the eight ball, so to speak, in terms of moving the ball down the field perspective. And it turned out to be a relative strength. I mean, we saw Philly Brown have a very solid season. We saw, the guys that were in the rotation, really everyone that wasn't named Jake Stoneburner did something in terms of catching the ball. Stoneburner was kind of a relative disappointment in terms especially of how much he was talked up by Urban Meyer and based on his practice performance and how he looked, I guess, and at least through secondhand reports of folks that had seen him in practice. So that was disappointing in one sense, but now we're going to bring in even more skilled playmakers. You mentioned Jalen Marshall, and that would have been somebody, like you said, that probably would have been the prize pig of a past Jim Tressel class, but now he's one of like five guys of his caliber. Mike Mitchell, a name we haven't even mentioned, is unbelievably exciting. I mean, this guy is a legit 4.40 linebacker, and I still think he might have been underrated. I think two surveys rated him as a 5-star and two rated him as a 4. Like, he may ultimately be every bit as good as Von Bell, if not better. So that's scary. And we saw Luke Fickell give really high praise to Trey Johnson today. I believe he mentioned that Johnson just has an instinct for playing the linebacker positions that few guys his age do, and I think that you can't teach stuff like that. So by getting a guy like Johnson in to help the Bucks, it's a super exciting time. I think we've rolled out just about every name in this class, and we were excited about every single one of them. Yeah. One name we haven't mentioned that I'm going to take us on a quick diatribe was kind of the late, I don't know if you want to call it a decommit. That's how I termed it in our recruiting recap piece, just because he's been solid for so long. But we don't know the backstory. But Johnny Townsend, the punter, rated as either a 2-star or a 3-star, depending on your recruiting service of choice. I don't know that Townsend is a must-have for the Buckeyes, or they do lose Ben Buchanan. Definitely some interesting questions. Meyer said that the position wasn't addressed, and he has concerns about it. So maybe it's a worry spot. What was your thoughts on the whole Townsend drama?
Here's how I look at it. If we're worrying about whether or not Ohio State was able to sign a punter or not, it's been a good day. Granted, special teams are a huge deal, and we saw a lot of issues with special teams last year at Ohio State, something we were very unaccustomed to seeing. Both, field goal kicking, punting, the entire gamut of special teams. So it's got to get better. But that's a problem I think that can be addressed in a lot of different ways. And if we lose a punting recruit on National Letter of Intent Day, that's not something I'm going to lose a whole lot of sleep over, considering what we were able to get in exchange for that, if you will. I mean, and one thing we talked about a little bit too, in past years when a lot of top Ohio kids would go to Michigan or that school up north, we don't want to call Michigan, we don't want Urban Meyer to threaten to hang up on us or anything. That we kind of just go, wail and moan and go, geez, we should have had that guy. And what would invariably happen is we would have to settle for a kid not as good as the one we lost. And what we're seeing under this coaching staff is, well, we might not like this kid from Ohio, which is very strange for us as Ohio State fans. We'll just go out and get somebody better. We lose Damani Thomas. All right, we'll go get Von Bell. really? I mean, that just is something we're not used to seeing. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just very something that's very foreign to us. I like it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just new and it's different. This more national style, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not something that, yeah, having followed Ohio State closely for as long as we did in the Jim Tressel era, we're accustomed to it. It still feels kind of foreign and different. Definitely not in a bad way. And I'll certainly, take the drama of adding a Von Bell at the 11th hour every single day of the week. Another name we didn't mention at all, Marcus Baugh, is a guy that really stood out of the 7-on-7s at the opening 2012 as well. Baugh, maybe the best Ohio State tight end skill set wise since Ricky Dudley. So that's exciting, in and of itself. It's not a super position of need in the Meyer offense and the Meyer-Herman offense, but we saw what they did with Aaron Hernandez, and supposedly Jake Stoneburner was going to be that before he got weirdly moved to wide receiver and was just a blocker basically all season. But I think that Ball could actually be that vertical threat at the tight end position. It's easy for them to sell, I'm sure, to kids like Ball that he's going to be the next Aaron Hernandez. There's no guarantee of that, but it's exciting just to have a guy that has those pass catching abilities and good size, good speed at the tight end position. That can you ever? I mean, Reed Frago was a tight end for Jim Tressel. That pretty much says it all.
Yeah, and I can't. Yeah, Ricky Dudley probably is the one that comes to mind more than anybody else. And you're thinking how good Ricky Dudley was, and I don't want to say it's an afterthought in this offense, but it's kind of an afterthought in this offense, and that's sort of a terrible thing to say because the guys that they're bringing in are talented and we would hail in just about any other class in any other year, but this has just been such a special year for recruiting that it's almost embarrassing to say that a kid like that is almost overlooked.
Yeah. Now, I'm super satisfied with this class. I mean, depending on which recruiting ranking services you're looking at, as I mentioned in the post containing this live video podcast, Ohio State is basically no lower than 3, which, hey, that's awesome. They're also number 1 according to Scout, which is just mind-boggling. I mean, Alabama has like a dozen 5-star kids, it seems like. Maybe not that many, but it just seemed like, given how strong their class was, that just wouldn't be the case. Is there anyone out there, and this might be tough offhand, but is there any one name that you wish Ohio State had maybe gotten that they didn't?
Maybe, talk about we talked about Diamante Thomas earlier. They, for whatever reason, they didn't really recruit him very hard, and so he got an offer from Michigan and went. But again, that's probably me falling back on Ohio State closing the Ohio borders.
Yeah, I felt it's funny you say that. I felt very similar about David Dawson. Like, I felt like he was this huge loss because Dawson is just such a Tressel recruit, and in reality, like, I don't know that Ohio State necessarily really needs him. I mean,
yeah, it's gonna take some getting used to in going from the Tressel recruiting philosophy to the Urban Meyer recruiting philosophy. And it's not a bad transition. I'm not trying to say that at all, obviously. Look at the haul they just got. It's just different. We're so used to looking at the top prospects from Ohio year in and year out and saying, well, yeah, this kid will be ours, that kid will be ours, this kid will be ours. That's not necessarily true anymore. But that's also not necessarily bad either.
Yeah. I think, again, one more name. This isn't a guy that I actually miss. I'm not huge on him based on his tape, but I think he will be very good in their offense, is Michigan's new tailback that they brought in, Derek Green. He's a guy that would be a perfect Jim Tressel running back, and if we had lost him, it would have really cut deep and stung. And I think he's going to be good for Michigan, and especially given that offensive line haul they brought in. 2 names that I'll randomly throw out, and this just shows how spoiled we are. I really liked Max Redfield's tape from Mission Viejo. He was a one-time USC commit. Ohio State played with him a little bit. He wound up decommitting and going to Notre Dame. Never really considered the Buckeyes after he decommitted from USC. No. Other random name that Ohio State, I think Stan Drayton was in on him early, but it was never a thing where he was that interested, was a Tampa, Florida kid, Vernon Hargraves III, who's going to Florida. He may be the best corner in this class, and as much as I love Von Bell at safety, I love Hargraves just as much there. I'm honestly fine with everybody else. Ohio State certainly didn't need J.T. Barrett fills the quarterback void. Another name we didn't mention, but a guy that's just, it's his speed isn't outstanding, but as one of our commenters, Pruitt, pointed out, I mean, he has like weird Braxton similarities despite not being as fast. I mean, the guy is quite the dual threat player once he gets over his lingering knee issue. he's claiming that he's going to be back to full spring full action by May, which I don't know if I'm buying that, but he hit him 2 major ligament tears. If he is back, even if he redshirts, which as expected, I mean, the guy could be Ohio State starter when Braxton Miller leaves, or Braxton Miller has a monster year. That could be next year. So I'm pretty much fine with it. Would it have been nice to get like Jalen Smith or Vernon Hargraves? Well, sure, but you're not going to get, looking at, unless you're Ole Miss, apparently, you're not going to get more than one kid in the top 25, or maybe 2 kids in the top 25 anyway.
And also, when you're looking at defensive backs, I don't even know if we've mentioned this kid yet, Cameron Burrows. I mean, you might have mentioned him earlier.
Yeah, briefly. He's another stud.
Yeah, absolute stud. And when you look at guys, with Roby coming back, and now you've got Von Bell signed and Cameron Burrows, you really like the makeup of the secondary and the receivers, and obviously the defensive line from last year carry over. I mean, if there's any questions at all, maybe it would be the offensive line, but it was a solid unit last year. I mean, Ed Werner really did a great job coaching those kids up, and the improvement was pretty substantial from 2011 to 2012. So, I mean, I think this is going to be a team that when we see them play in 2013, that's going to be really fundamentally sound and 2 and 3 deep at almost every position on both sides of the ball, which is incredible when you stop and think about it. It's just incredible how much talent that Meyer has brought in just 2 recruiting classes.
Yeah, I can't agree more. We sound like the biggest fanboy homers in the world in this rant, but
we kind of do.
It's just the class is that good. I mean, it's an A+ class, and I look forward to Urban Meyer trying to one-up himself next year. Even if Ohio State, doesn't run the gauntlet. I think I said today when I was on with SBNation.com's Dan Rubenstein talking Big Ten recruiting that I thought based on Ohio State's relatively weak schedule that they would run the table, and but they might find themselves in a spot where they're not necessarily in the national title game because their schedule has been so weak. Knock on wood, I hope it doesn't happen, but that's kind of my feeling right now. How insane would it be, though, regardless of what happens bowl-wise, that we're talking about a guy that had 2 consecutive unbeaten regular seasons? We've got plenty of time to talk about depth. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Michigan is certainly going to be much improved. They weren't as bad as the record indicated. I still think 5 losses is 5 losses. Wisconsin's in a little bit of turnaround. We'll have plenty of times to break down all that stuff. But this is an excellent class, and take it for what it is.
Enjoy the
ride. Yeah, we'll certainly. We'll see what happens. Yeah, 2014 will be a completely different. I think I just got pinged by SB Nation recruiting's Bud Elliott saying, "What about the 2014 schedule?" So it doesn't get 2013. Maybe weak with Buffalo and Florida A&M, but once we have a playoff too, everything changes anyway. So I'm SB Nation's Land Grant Holy Land Ohio State blog for SB Nation's manager Luke Zimmerman, joined by Ted Glover, writer on the site, writes for Off Tackle Empire as well in Daily Norseman. Land Grant Holy Lands, Hangout in the Holy Land, episode 11, National Signing Day. Pretty good run for the Buckeyes. We'll see what comes from here. 2014 starts tomorrow. Let's do it.
Yep, let's go.